We have an awesome opportunity to hear from two of our global leaders, two CEOs from both ShoreTel and Vonage. So it's my pleasure to introduce them today. First of all, Don Joes from ShoreTel. Don was appointed the CEO of ShoreTel in 2013, and he has a proven track record of building and transforming business through innovative growth plays, and he brings a wealth of strategy, operations, and execution to ShoreTel. Don joined ShoreTel in 2011. He was the Vice President of Global Services, and later he served as the Senior Vice President of Business Operations, overseeing the company operations through the direct management of engineering, research and development, project management, global support services, IT, quality, and operations. Prior to joining ShoreTel, Don spent 9 years as a company vice president at Avaya. First, he led the North American team and then moved over to the Global Services Group. He also has applied his business entrepreneurial capabilities. He's built an e-commerce startup, and he's held service and operations roles at Williams Communication Solutions, Nortel Communication Solutions, and Marshalls. He holds a bachelor's degree in sports management from Springfield College in Massachusetts. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage from ShoreTel, Don Joes.
Thanks, man.
And I think you guys might know Adam Edwards. Next, Alan Masarek joined Vonage as the Chief Executive Officer and a member of the Board of Directors in November of 2014. Mr. Masarek came to Vonage from Google, where he was the Director of the Chrome and Apps products, and from June 2012 until October 2014, following the acquisition of his previous company, QuickOffice Incorporated. He's an innovator with deep experience in mobile, SMB, and enterprise. Mr. Masarek was the co-founder of QuickOffice, Inc., one of the world's most widely recognized mobile brands, and he served as the Chief Executive Officer of that product from July 2007 until June 2012. It was under his leadership that QuickOffice became the world's most widely embedded mobile productivity software. With top-grossing iPad, it was a top-grossing iPad app and a top 10 grossing app in the Google Play Store, engaging more than 26 million registered users at the time of Google's purchase. Following that acquisition, Mr. Masarek became the Director of Chrome and Apps for Google. Prior to co-founding QuickOffice, Mr. Masarek was co-founder, Chief Executive Officer, and Chairman of Ad Outlet Incorporated, a marketplace for media industry from April 1999 to September 2001. Previously, he was president of Advanced Health Corporation, where he led the organization from development to growth into a publicly traded services and IT company. Mr. Masarek earned his MBA from Harvard Business School and his BBA from the University of Georgia. Welcome to the stage, the CEO of Vonage, Alan Masarek.
Thanks, Bryce. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to hand off Adam Edwards.
Thanks, Bryce. Great to be here today with two global CEOs, especially some CEOs with such fashion sense. Don't know if you noticed, but prerequisite these days for being a successful CEO is the fashion sense, and we appreciate the socks that you wore today. I've had a great time talking with Don, you, and also with you, Alan, about some of the things taking place in the industry, and what a great opportunity to share some of those with our partners today. First topic I want to discuss is really the transition, which just seems to be the norm now. And Alan, we'll get started with you. As you and I talked about your recruitment from Google, where you were last, as I talked to you about Vonage, what were your thoughts as you looked at the opportunity?
So, anytime I look at a market, the first thing I always look at and say, is it a market that's worth winning? And so if you look at the trend that was happening at the time and continues this day on the move to cloud, it obviously is this massive market segment that was clearly worth winning. And then as I was sort of due diligencing the opportunity, looking at the assets of Vonage at the time, it's do we have the assets in place that give us a good shot at winning? And so my conclusion was that we did, and that's why I jumped in and took this role. Coming from the residential side of the house, you have this extraordinarily aware brand. Now the brand obviously was known more in the residential space, but we sort of invented the residential VoIP space, and it's an adjacency going into the business market. And so we found the brand to be a great attribute. And then you've got the underlying cash flows of the residential business. So today we're about $1 billion company in aggregate. Now we have flipped the bit in terms of business being larger of the two segments. But we still have a little less than a $500 million business in residential, which is wildly profitable. And so that profitability that comes from residential has enabled us to hit this transformation so quickly and so hard. I mean, so in 3.5 years, we've gone from 0 revenues in business to now it being the dominant segment. And then the third asset is the network itself. So from the residential side, we still terminate 15 billion minutes of calls a year. That volume has given us the direct peering relationships with major carriers. We own our own phone numbers. It gives us cost and quality advantages from a network perspective. So when you sort of bring brand, cash flow, and network together and then use those advantages to buy world-class companies, which we've done, to jumpstart this move, that's how we've made this progress. I mean, if you look at, we're 3.5 years into this pivot. Business now is itself about $500 million in revenue, which puts us #1 among all the pure plays, with very high organic rates of growth. Then we have that brand advantage, cash flow advantage, network advantage, and then putting together now both the UCaaS and the CPaaS offerings at scale, which we think gives our customers a better value prop at the end of the day. So, we'll talk more about that, but that's kind of how we've seen this pivot.
So you're looking at the situation, you assess, and your assessment is, okay, is it worth winning and can we win it? And you decide both are yes, but we've got to make this pivot. So in the audience today, we've got people who are in the midst of transition, because transition has really been a constant for the last 6 years as I've seen it. It's been a constant. They're either in the midst of transition or they started their business a week ago. Yeah. So this is on everyone's mind. So once you knew you had to transition, you're in the seat. What were some of the steps you took to transition the company away from this residential, known brand over to a business enterprise?
So the first thing you have to address is the organizational and cultural elements. There's a saying that Ginni Rometty at IBM, the IBM CEO, is famous for that says, growth and comfort do not coexist. And nothing could be truer. Growth and comfort do not coexist. So here you have people who have been involved in residential for better than a decade, and you're now saying the underlying mission of the company was this, and it's going to this. And in Vonage's situation, you had, for 5 straight years, the company was losing revenue in residential as the home phone was declining in its utility. We as an outsider could look at that and say, oh my goodness, you've got to have abrupt change because for 5 years you've been in decline. But if you've been in the company living through that 5 years of decline, you sort of get accustomed to that as the new normal. You don't feel the sense of urgency you need to. So it's really helpful coming from the outside to say, look, I know where that movie is going to end. You've got to change. So one of the first things we did is we were organized. Now, we had already had one acquisition on the business side, but at that point when I got there, we were still 90% consumer and 10% business. So I functionalized the organization. I put it together under common leadership, functional, so the engineering all came up to engineering, product up to product, sales up to sales, across the board, so that no one had a particular silo they were trying to defend. The consumer folks could say, I'm in consumer, I'm going to fight moving over to the business side. So we functionalized. So the way I like to say it, no one had a particular dog in the hunt. We were making decisions, investment decisions, that simply were in the best interest of the company, and that was on the business side. So that helped a great deal. Now that we've flipped the bit and business is the larger segment, we're actually going back the other way. I'm redivisionalizing consumer because you need to have a focus, an unambiguous focus that we are a business company. Matter of fact, I've changed the terminology internally in Vonage. So we used to talk about Vonage Business and Vonage Consumer. I don't let anybody say those words any longer. We talk about Vonage and residential. Now, I'm a big believer that words matter. And so Vonage means business. I'll tell people all the time, if you come to our conferences and such and you see the big booths that we put up there, it says, Vonage Business. And starting, 2-3 years ago, I'd say, soon it's not going to say business because Vonage means business. You've got to drive people to where it's going. And so in your world as agents and partners, as I think about it, the products that you're selling are fundamentally changing. The needs of your customers are fundamentally changing. You may yourselves have to wean yourself from a perpetual licensing model or an upfront hardware sale model because the world is increasingly going to cloud. I mean, in my view, it's not in dispute. It's going. So you've got to, be in front of that, or you'll be left behind. And so, I think about these market transitions as a journey. You've got to be suitable for that journey. You've got to drive ahead of it, or you're going to get, bowled over by it. That's the way I think about it.
So, Alan, you went and you were an agent of change in this company. Don, you had a very different experience. So you're in a manufacturing company. You were at Avaya, you moved to ShoreTel, and then you're at the reins running this company. And all of a sudden, rather than being that agent of change from the outside, from within, you decided to take a perfectly fine running company, a company that was doing fine, I'm sure getting accolades from the board and saying, we've got to make this pivot and we've got to pivot hard. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think if I step back to why I joined at the time was I could see where the market was going. And so it really comes down to what do you believe? And absolutely believe that there was this transformation in the marketplace. There was this shift in how customers were going to be looking to consume services. And within the team at ShoreTel, I was hearing a similar view and an appetite. And so once I got into the company, it became a very quick conversation about build versus buy and what were the trade-offs in there. And we chose the buy path because we had the funds to do it, and we also knew that the time it would take us to go through and develop it and go through a lot of the cultural aspects of it was going to be really, really hard. And so we made the buy decision, not so much to buy technology, but we were buying a business model into what we were looking for. And so then that began. So when I stepped into the CEO role, this was not about assessing the situation. This was about hitting the gas. This was about getting the integration completed and getting it moving. And so it was really, for driving a transformation, for me, it really comes down to, I'm never a big believer in vision statements or mission statements because no one ever remembers what they are and they never really mean anything. It's more about a mantra, having a mantra. And so, for us, this is not about being very similar, I think, what Alan's talking about. It's ShoreTel is about business communications. It's not about cloud. It's not about on-site. Those are just delivery models. What do we do? From a mantra, we make interactions simple. And for me, it's that interactions, getting people their head around interactions. Interactions is more than just communications, okay? Because there's people to people, there's people to machine, there's machine to machine activities that are going on. How do we make all these forms of interaction simple? How do we embed communications into the workflow of an organization? So really getting a mantra around that and people understanding that and internalizing it into the various parts of the functions. But it's also a lot in regards to the communications, because when you're looking to make a transformation, you're usually looking 3 to 5 years out. And the organization, especially as a publicly traded company, is looking, okay, how do I live the next 90 days? And so, it's kind of like when your pool gets cloudy or it's got algae in it, you got to shock the system sometimes. And so you have to selectively do things that are not tweaks to the system, but are more of a wake up for people to realize what's happening. But you got to keep connecting the dots. My teams hear me say it all the time, connecting the dots, because it is amazing, right? The employees will connect the dots. Just not always in the manner you want them to connect if you're not careful about how you're doing it. And so the regular communications that are going on, I've found that finding as many forums as you can to communicate it. I do a lot of WAV files or MP3 files out to the audience, just different ways to communicate, and also don't spend a lot of time at headquarters. I would always encourage people. Best ideas are going to come out of the field. They're not going to come out of headquarters, so I only spend about 30% of my time at headquarters, 70% I'm somewhere else. So for me, the transformation really ties to getting that mantra in place and then setting clear phases that you're going to step through. So for us, I set in place, there was a foundation, a migration, and an acceleration phase. And there was key activities that were happening. And so we laid out all three. Now, obviously, you do make adjustments as you work your way through it, but having clear phases that you're going to move through, clear outcomes that people can see, and then you just keep tying the dots. This action is tying to this phase, but here's how it fits into the bigger picture of where we're going and why we need to make that change. For me, it's just having clarity in the organization of when I always use racing, if you're on a straightaway, you're hitting the gas hard as fast as you can. But sometimes you got a turn coming, and you need to ease into that turn. And in an organization, whether it's dealing with the channel or it's dealing with the employees, there's a capacity of change that you have to constantly be assessing and monitoring, because otherwise I call it empty calories. You can make a lot of change, but if you're not actually creating an outcome that you want, you've just wasted time. So it's really having an assessment of the channel and the employee base, how much change can they do it, because they need to internalize this. And so for me, it's always understanding in a transformation where you are in that straightaway versus that turn.
So let's talk a little bit about the channel, because ShoreTel is a company that was built by the channel. In the 90s, these partners came, huge partner company, I think a model for a lot of people on how to work with the channel. But then you had a challenge with a lot of these companies pivoting. We've got some in the audience who are actually ShoreTel partners who have made or are making that pivot. But you and I talked, I believe it was last summer, and you expressed some frustration to me when you said, I've worked to pivot a $400 million company. And some of these $10 million partners are just not pivoting. Give us some background on that.
Yeah, I was having a conversation with a partner, and we were talking about just transformations in general, just more from a business model perspective. And he was conveying to me, he was saying to me, no, you don't understand. He says, it's impossible for me to make this change here. And I was like, well, okay, what's kind of your revenue size? And he's like, it's about 10 million. I'm like, how many people do you have? And it was probably around, 50, 60, 70 people in there. And I was like, okay. I said, I'm taking a public company that's got 400 million in revenue and about 1,200 employees on a global basis. I said, and we're making this shift. And you're telling me you can't take 50 or 60 people on a 10 million base and make a similar shift here? What's holding you back? And everything that he was putting up everything was in his control. And that was, the change is very difficult for people when it's being dictated to them. Change, most people can tolerate it when they're in control of the situation. I always use the example of, think about it, those who fly, right? When you change your flight, you're good with that change. When the airline cancels it and they force a change on you, you're not too happy about it. It's all about being in control. And when I was taking this partner through this, every objection he was putting up, I was saying, yes, but you can decide if you want to do that or not. And so we have definitely seen change management. We have definitely seen some partners, just absolutely jump in. They get it. They're making the change. They're making that quick shift. There's others who are, I call it the herd mentality. They'll follow the herd. Once there's momentum going, they'll quickly jump on board. And some, they're more in a lifestyle, and they don't want to make that change. And that's okay too. This is not about a right or wrong. It's just about, this is where we're going. And so we need to put the energy on the people who are on board with where the strategy is going right now. But I find that the vast majority, the issues, it's all within the control. The question is, do you want to make the change?
Great point. Alan.
So just echoing what Don said, these change curves or adoption curves, whether you're going through prem to cloud or perpetual to a recurring model, it doesn't matter. Almost any life change goes through these, or business change goes through these same curves. You have the early adopter, you have the sort of large majority, then you have the laggards at the end. And I think what Don's saying, and I agree fully, is you've got to break it down into digestible chunks. And you also have to be out there, and I do that, we're both road warriors. We travel like crazy. You have to be in front of your teams, communicating where we're going to, celebrating the milestones, setting or talking about, or sort of creating the incentives that reward the behavior that you have to have. So if you're trying to wean yourself from a perpetual model to an MRR-based model, how you create the incentives with certain of your team members is critical, how you reward those behaviors. And ultimately, I talk often about this being a journey. And people absorb, whether people are in my company or elsewhere, people are going to absorb change some are sort of predisposed to accept change and others are not. And that's why you have early adopters all the way to laggards. In that journey, certain people are not going to make the trip because they're going to be sort of, oppositional to the change because the good old days perhaps were good for them or they're just not sufficiently comfortable with it. So my advice to everyone is to, as Don said, is chunk it down, create the incentives out there, get out there face to face with your people, and my favorite expression is rinse and repeat over and over and over again. And again, if you went back to your own teams, or if I went to my teams when we were 100% residential and said, hey, in 3.5 years we're going to be more than half business, they'd look at me like I had two heads. It's so far removed from their experience they can't accept it. So you've got to make it more digestible for people. There's an expression, people can't achieve what they can't imagine. So if you present them with a goal that's just too esoteric, it's multi-years down the road, it's so different than what their experiences are today, they'll just reject it. So how can they achieve it if they can't even imagine it, they can't even see it? So you've got to lay it out in as bite-sized a way as possible so they can imagine it, they can see it, then they can achieve it.
Thank you. Good points. Let's continue on this topic of transition and transformation and talk about where the product is going. As Alan, and I'd like to start with you. As you look at the product of UC, where do we go from here?
So when I think about UC, in many respects, and I sort of try to simplify things, I think about we have built an industry largely around a couple different use cases, the PBX and the contact center. Now, we all know the impact of UC in terms of moving the software stack to the cloud, normalizing all modes of communication on IP, have fundamentally changed workflows and all that. But it's really core built around two use cases. We've been very focused of late, in addition to UCaaS, also now with the acquisition of Nexmo on CPaaS, because and as has Don with the acquisition of Corvisa, because it's been our view that many times we talk about that the underlying functionality in a PBX among the various carriers is more similar than it is different. And that's challenging. And so then as carriers, we tend to go in there and market through you as partners or direct to customers or whatever in sort of kind of on the borders, if you will. So one may talk about workstream messaging or someone else contact center or someone else, one other angle. But my view is that we're not fundamentally talking about improving the business outcomes for our customers. We have to do that as an industry, otherwise it's a fight to the bottom. And so when I think about CPaaS, and Don and I are both enthusiastic about CPaaS, the purview of those solutions, of microservices and communications, have mostly been directed at customer communications, how our business customers communicate with their customers in a very lightweight way. So microservices or APIs, what it means is you're embedding communications into something else because it makes the something else better. Into your website, into your mobile app, into your business process, into your workflow, because it makes the underlying thing better. The use cases are well beyond the PBX and contact center use case because it's a virtually limitless number of use cases because communications is used in so many different areas to make, use the example of two-factor authentication or the proxy number use case we speak about often. Like with Uber, who's a big customer of ours, when you communicate with the Uber driver, what's happening behind the scenes is we're spawning a proxy number in the local area code, so it protects the privacy of the driver's number and the passenger's number, so that you can connect and say, hey, I'm the tall guy in the corner, you just missed me, so that the ride happens. We as passengers don't want the Uber driver knowing our number. I don't want my daughter's number known to the driver, nor does Uber want you knowing the driver's personal number because they're concerned you're going to go off book. You'll call the driver directly, say, pick me up in 10 minutes, and they won't get paid therefore. So you have a use case which has nothing to do in that instance with PBX or contact center. And then these numbers of use cases are exploding all the time. But where the magic kicks in is if you can integrate now the customer communications back into those employee communications, the PBX, the contact center, the workstream messaging, and then all of that back into the other workflow tools that all our business customers use. They're all using, Office 365 or G Suite or NetSuite or Dynamics or Zendesk or Gmail, whatever, So they're all using those other cloud services that have nothing to do with communications, but that's the world. So integrating that chain so you can talk to a customer about improving their outcomes, their business outcomes, from the customer communication back into the employee communication, back into the workflow, what we are finding is it's changing fundamentally the conversation with the customer. It's no longer about, well, gee, that guy's auto attendant is the same as your auto attendant. His hunt group, same as your hunt group. Now you're talking about something which is improving fundamental business outcomes. We have to do that as an industry, in my view, or it's going to be increasingly a commoditized world, which we don't want. None of us want. We want to improve business outcomes for our customers.
Great. So Don, do you share that view?
Yeah, I think the definition of UC is going to change quite a bit over the next couple of years. I think it's has an older definition. I think the modes of communications have continued to evolve. How people are communicating today is different than how they communicated a couple of years ago, how they communicate into the future. To Alan's point, because of the technology and the ability, the enablement to embed communications into workflow and into business processes in very, very simple ways. So I think just the overall definition, as I was describing, is when we look out into the future, you see people-to-people communicating, and that's a lot of what we deal with today. But there's more people-to-machine. And whether that is, as consumers, right, if you're an iPhone user and using Siri, that's a people-to-machine scenario. When today you can go into an IVR, you can get balances, you can do transactions, you can schedule appointments, you can make payments. That's a people-to-machine scenario. And there's machine-to-machine is really, with self-driving cars, or what I describe as a smart conference room, as a machine-to-machine. So as I think about, in the near future, not too far out, is the ability. I'm on the road all the time, right? So this is my primary device, but the ability to go into the conference room when I have a conference call at 9 o'clock, to go in and it knows who I am because of presence. I'm on the network. It knows I'm supposed to be there at 9 o'clock. Well, it knows I'm going to do a call because my calendar says there's an 800 number and a passcode. So it just automatically opens up the bridge and dials it in. But then you can start to have a teamwork application with the digital assistant embedded into there. So when I'm having a team meeting and we're using a collaboration tool that people in the company and outside the company are doing a common task or a project on, and I say, hey, let's take an action. I want to assign Adam this task. The assistant wakes up and takes the action and immediately puts it into the action register of the application that we're all sharing, and everyone inside and outside the company see Adam now has an action, and it's due on this date based upon what I said. And that is just taking technology and embedding it, whether it's Internet of Things or it's just other forms of the communication, and embedding it into the workflow, into our business processes that we deal with, and just making it better. Because I think about UC is more about from an internal productivity perspective, versus when we talk about CPaaS, it's about how do we enable a customer to better interact with their customer. And that's really the difference in this. So Alan and I have talked previously, we have a very similar view, is that there's a lot of conversation about UCaaS and CPaaS. We really see those two blurring together into the needs, because the customer needs, the mid-market and enterprise customer, who is, over the next couple of years, is going to be the largest driver of communication solutions adoption from a cloud perspective. That's what they're looking for. They're saying is that I have a core competency, and I also need to outsource some stuff. So they're looking at a company like us and saying, I want you to be a provider of certain capabilities, but I have my own development organization, or I work with a third party where we create our own proprietary things, our own unique secret sauce that makes us different in the marketplace, whether that's experiential or it's revenue growth or it's how they handle their margins or customer sat. And I want to be able to build my own things and integrate it with what I'm buying from you. And so where ShoreTel is evolving is really about being not just a provider, but being a provider and an enabler of a solution, because that is really where the needs of the customer is going. And so it kind of ties back a little bit to the earlier conversation about the change that's going on, and why people need to change their business model. It's because the customer's changing. Right? If you're not evolving with what the customer needs are doing, you are narrowing your addressable market. The customers are moving, their needs are changing in here, and they want to continue to embed these communications into their business processes to make them better. Better for internal, or more importantly, better for their customer. And so what it really creates is a different conversation to be having with the customer, because now it's about a business process. It's about a business problem they're trying to solve for. So it's a broader solution conversation. And then, okay, how do we now enable this to happen? And again, whether it's you doing some of the development for them, or they have their own people. But these are microservices, as Alan was talking about. These are not elongated things. I mean, I am seeing people right now build applications on a communications platform service that is taking about a day or two to build. So that's the cycle time that we're seeing a lot of people right now. These are not, definition of application is going to change with the advantages of the technology right now. This is not, I don't want people to think applications like they see a contact center application or a mobility application. You're talking a roadmap, you're talking heavy R&D. We have customers right now who are building IVRs who don't even have our contact center. but they're building IVR services for specific business needs, for specific parts of their business, and it takes them about 2 days to build. And then they stand up the next IVR, and then they stand up the next IVR, and it's all underlying is the SIP technology. So for me, that's a big foundation for this audience is you get the SIP technology in place, then you leverage the platform to build off of it to drive that usage.
Yeah. Alan.
Well, I just want, again, thinking about change and anticipating our respective customers' needs, I'll take CPaaS down to a couple, like a super easy example, which is if we could go to each of our customers, because we all know how heavy a lift it is to do a complete change out from prem to cloud on PBX or contact center. It's a heavy lift. But what if we went to our customers and said, I can cut your inbound 800 number costs in half? That's not a heavy lift. That doesn't take a lot of thought process, so simplifying it. This is a CPaaS, this is an example of CPaaS utility that, so again, I'll reach for my phone as well. So this is, remember, half of all search, more than half of all search happens from a smartphone. When you get to a customer's, anybody gets to a business's website, invariably there's a toll-free number to call that customer, to buy that customer's product, or to go to their support desk, right? Why, when you're calling from a smartphone for which you do not pay for the long distance, does the receiving company pay to terminate an inbound toll-free number? Doesn't make any sense. No one gets to an 800 number, any other way other than by searching and getting to the website. If more than half of search comes from this, why does your customer pay to terminate inbound 800 number? Because it's just the way we've always done it. It's an historical artifact. So you can go to your customers very simply and say, well, hey, that proxy number use case I was talking about in the Uber example, where you spawn a proxy number in the local area code? When you get to that customer's website and see the 800 number, just click the call. And it spawns the native dialer, and you just confirm the call. You never dial anything. Just hit it twice with your thumb, and there you go. And do it in a toll call in the local area code, not a toll-free. So it's a way where you're now using communications in a different, super simple way that changes the business outcomes. So you could look at this move to CPaaS and say, well, I'm used to, it's hard enough for me to go from upfront hardware sales, perpetual license revenues, to a recurring model. Now you're telling me if I go to CPaaS, that's a pay-as-you-go model, because I only get paid when it's used. And where does my commission come from? So, and you can that can stymie change as you think through, well, heck, how's that going to get operationalized? But understand, if you always focus on how can I improve the business outcomes for my customer, you're going to win. The business models will adjust for it. Once you can hook a customer in a conversation about communications can better your business outcomes, then you can get involved, in my opinion, with the more complex discussion. So can I use the soggy French fries use case example? So we won a very large restaurant chain, about a 500-unit restaurant chain. They had and it was a PBX bake-off against everybody. I don't know who was in the specific deal, but it was an RFP. We all were in it. But what won it was CPaaS, and they had a strategic imperative to grow the takeout business. It was an eat in the restaurant chain, but their goal was to build the takeout business. So they started having their customers text in orders. The problem is they didn't know whether the customer was going to walk in 5 minutes or 35 minutes. So you didn't know when to drop the French fries into the oil. So if the guy walks in 35 minutes and the French fries have been sitting under the heat lamp, hence soggy French fries. So we call this the soggy French fries use case. All that we did was geofence these 500 restaurants. It's super simple to do. And then use the GPS on the device. GPS is in the customer's pocket. When it enters the geofence, indicating that they're 5 minutes out from getting to the restaurant, a bot sends a text and says, start cooking that customer's order, and then sends another text to the customer saying, don't even come in the restaurant, park in the 2 designated spaces, and we'll bring, for pickup, and we'll bring the food out to you. We've used communications to better their business outcomes. They had a strategic imperative to grow the takeout business. Had nothing to do with PBX, nothing to do with contact center, but we used communications to better their business outcome. We won a UCaaS deal because we could talk with their leadership about bettering their business outcomes. That's, in my opinion, what we need to do as an industry.
That's great. So great definition of outcomes, some examples of some. Now, Don, this is real-time stuff. So we're not talking about the future. It's already taking place with the soggy French fries with Uber. Also, you held a contest internally.
We did.
To, I think, demonstrate to everybody what it was, but also how easy it was.
Yeah, this ties in a little bit to the change management too. So this whole point of there's a different conversation that's happening, or that you have permission to have now. I was talking with a bunch of partners recently who have been having a lot of success in fulfilling these kind of use cases. And it was funny. They're like, oh, this is a gold mine. You know, these opportunities, like they were always there. We just weren't having the right conversation with the right people, but you now have that ability. And so that's a key thing right now, and I think Alan and I are both saying, is these opportunities are there. It's a different conversation. So internally, we had our CPaaS is called Summit. And so again, it's increasing the awareness. This is about the proof points and creating the change management. So we had an internal challenge. So we had the entire company had an opportunity to build applications on our Summit platform, and then we had a contest of what were some of the best ones. I mean, our general counsel created an app, our CFO created an app. I mean, it was a whole bunch of people. My favorite was in one of our offices up in, we have a bunch of technical resources up in Rochester, New York. And so one of the employees built an app. It took about 45 minutes to build. He linked it into for Yelp, because the business problem. I'm hungry at lunchtime, where's all the food trucks? I want to know where all the food trucks are within a 1 mile radius of our office so I know where to go. And so all he did was he built a simple application tied into Yelp where all the food trucks were. So now everyone in that office can just go call a number and they get it and they know exactly where to go versus they're trying to guess. Now, that solves a very important problem, hunger. But, you know, it's just an example of a simple business problem that they're experiencing, and it took them 45 minutes to create a solution for it. And that was kind of waking up the organization as, oh my gosh, these are quick hit kind of items here. And so that then gets into the stories, it gets into the channel, it gets into how we have these conversations. But it's those microservices, those minor things, that creates your wedge in, and then you just start to build that. What's the next problem? What's the next problem? Oh, well, let's take more of the underlying foundation. And it just gets you further into it. So it was a great challenge, and it was amazing because the creativity is open. We've enabled them to do things. And so really it's about where their creativity is going to go. For you, it's about changing the conversation to really get into where are the business problems and taking small bites out of I always call it take small bites out of the apple.
And I think that's one of the challenges we have because we talk about these big, nebulous, broad terms like business outcomes and solutions. And then you listen to these examples, and they're very specific. To me, it feels like we're looking at the produce section and the butcher section of the supermarket and saying, we can make anything. And for someone like me who's not a chef, I don't know where to begin. Mm-hmm. And so it's nice to see these products rolling out where I think people like me can just go and sell that same thing over and over. Now, Don, you've actually got partners developing right now. As you illustrated, these are not multi-month, multi-year development applications. They're doing it rather quickly and having success. What kind of apps are they building?
Yeah, so I mean, from the application development perspective, I mean, really there are the mid-market enterprise customers, and again, like I said, a lot of times they have internal developers in-house. So they just want access to the APIs to do it, or they work commonly with a third party. What we're also building out is, partners are realizing is, hey, this is repeatable. I build it once, it can then be resold. So we're creating an ecosystem where these applications are available and certified that have now other partners have access. Because some people are just saying is, I love it. I'm not going to go develop it myself, but I want a marketplace where I can go grab these tools and start bringing them in. The early stage right now, what we're seeing a lot of is definitely on the IVR. There's a lot of things around the contact. You can build up simple services from an IVR perspective regardless of what the contact center is, and they're just creating it there. So they're creating a lot of self-service capabilities, payment authentication. There is leveraging the SMS from a notification perspective. We're seeing a lot of people tying into customer experience perspective right now, where they want to have a tailored experience where you get a customized account manager. So you're assigned account manager. So whether you're calling in, whether you're texting, whether you're hitting the website, taking the key parts and always linking it back through their CRM to have that account manager always tied into there, to just leveraging the numbers. Berkshire Hathaway Real Estate is a customer of ours right now, and their biggest challenge was, got thousands of realtors out there, right, and they live off of their cell phone. The company doesn't want to pay for a mobility application, but their challenge is, right, then the cell phone number, when that person leaves the company, the customers go with the cell phone number. They don't stay loyal to there. And so what they've done now is just leveraging a numbering. They're putting a masking in front, so when you call, you're calling a number which then ties to that mobile phone, but Berkshire Hathaway controls all the numbering. So they're controlling that base. It took 2 days to build that out. So it's things of that nature. So I'm seeing a lot in the IVR, a lot in the notification, and a lot in the doing customer sat from a survey perspective. We have another company in the Maritime who has actually seen pretty significant improvements in their product warranty costs by just putting, through an IVR, creating a survey, and they're able to trace those results back to their warranty costs, and they've seen significant savings just simply by creating these IVRs in a much, much simpler manner for their customers. And so they've seen a huge uptick in the information coming in. Now they know how to deal with it, and then they can work on cutting their cost.
So what I hear you saying is partners can go out and build an application, a lightweight application. Mm-hmm. They can sell it to the customer and get usage commission off of that. Yeah. But also, if they want to, they can put it in the ecosystem so all partners can go and use that tool in their business. Is that accurate?
Yep.
So they can really play either role.
Yes, and they can, and that's the beauty behind it, is so that you can do it yourself, and some people are transforming their organizations where they've had professional services, more of professional services tied to making modifications to a product or doing implementation services, and they're now either redeploying or they're reallocating those resources, potentially a different skill set, into creating in-house development organizations. So it really depends on your business model. Some people want to build out applications, to Alan's point, to rinse and repeat, but make it available for others. Some people say, I want to be able to be the trusted advisor, but I want to leverage an ecosystem of tools that I'm just going to continue to bring in. Both are available, both work. The underlying thing is, back to the usage, is right, they're bringing the SIP capabilities into the solution, and then they're just stacking these microservices and applications on, which then drives the usage, and that's where the money comes in.
I actually spoke with one of your most successful partners, both legacy and he's pivoted his business to the point where he's way out in front, and credited conversations with you. I think you're connected to quite a few top agents and credited your conversations. And I believe the advice you gave to him was when he actually had some decisions to make of acquiring some competitors who were in a weakened position or investing in the future. And I believe your push to him was invest it all in the future.
Yeah, I absolutely. He was I would call the early adopter. He went all in on this equation here. He's the one who was commenting to me, oh my gosh, this is a gold mine out there, because he realized the change in the conversation that was happening. The point I was stressing to him, this is more nothing to do with technology, it was more about his business, was I was telling him is, if that's what you believe, get moving. You'll make course corrections, you'll figure some things out as you go. I grew up, I played probably 7-8 years worth of rugby. And I had a chance when I was living in Boston at the time, one of the top players in the world, Bob Egerton, was playing, he was a winger for Australia, and they just won the World Cup in '91, and he happened to be in the Boston area because his wife was getting a doctorate. So I got to be coached, because I played wing, by the top player in the world. And I remember him coaching me on rugby, and he made a comment to me. He says, when you get out of a pile, he said, Don, just get up and start running. He says, 9 times out of 10, your instincts are going to take you in the right direction. And he says, and every so often, you're going to be going the wrong way. He says, but you're running. Just course correct, adjust, and get back into the game. But he says, if you get out of that pile and just stand still, he said, you're useless to the team. And that's a little bit of what I was commenting to this partner about, is I said, you know what you need to go do. If you just stand there and analyze this thing, it's going to go blowing past you. Just get up. I said, start running, start moving, start seizing the opportunities, start making the changes to your business. You'll figure some of it out as you go. Make those course corrections, make the adjustments, but you're in motion. A lot of other people are standing still. And he took it, he embraced it, and he's way ahead of people right now in regards to the opportunity and the creativity. And he went all in. He redirected He brought in a bunch of fresh eyes into the organizations from a skill set. He now has a bunch of young developers in there right now just building out applications for himself as well as for others to use.
Thanks. So, Alan, I'd like to have you comment a bit on why partners are essential to this change going forward.
Right.
You know, you've really pushed the channel effort. You've been personally engaged, and going forward as we transform from not just these two use cases you talked about, UC and contact center, as they collapse, but as we get into CPaaS, why are partners a critical component of the sales motion?
So it really feeds very closely off what Don just said. So think of the effort that you've had over the last several years with customers. One, on education. So what I'm leading to is the channel is critical for education, because just like what you do today, you walk into a customer situation, you evaluate their environment, their suitability for cloud, let's say. You know, you're going through and adding value in areas that their IT folks who have to, you know, cover a range of specialties are less familiar about, you know, the notion of, you know, of UC. That opportunity exists in a huge way now as you go further into CPaaS, into using communications, not just in terms of how we've educated collectively customers on the benefits of cloud on the UC and contact center, so that industry is growing so quickly. But now, think of your ability to add value to your customers by explaining what is in the art of the possible in terms of using these communication tools in ways that are going to improve their businesses. And you don't need to be the person necessarily that's writing the code. Don't think of that, because that can even be too daunting. It's more about educating them about what is, again, pretty easy, pretty doable. Because the whole notion of, you know, throwing a few lines of API code into their underlying solution can make the underlying solution better. And our experience is you'll find the ability to have a valuable conversation with your customer simply by kind of teaching them about what is possible. And while you're doing that, the underlying use cases are getting more fully baked. This number of, like I described, like the proxy number use case, well, it's kind of a complex notion. It was probably a complex notion when it was invented a couple years ago, but now it's so widely adopted that it just becomes simple. Two-factor authentication has been around for quite a while. It's just simple. But before that became kind of a, if you will, think of it as a finished good, as opposed to a raw material, it probably was pretty complex. So the tools are getting more simple, more finished, more complete, easier and easier and easier for your customers to use. You just need to help educate them. And my opinion, your customers are going to appreciate it because you're talking about a way that can improve their bottom lines. That's a big deal.
I think tying to that complexity versus things being simple, organizations, you know, thinking about how people have their resources. The reason professional services exist in a lot of companies is because stuff is complex.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of professional services. That's the value add, is you're shielding the customer from that by having a professional services organization. As it becomes simpler and simpler and simpler with these microservices, that's why I say those needs are going to go away, but you have an opportunity to redeploy that concept to then take advantage of these more simpler things. That's a fundamental shift that I see going on that people are struggling with a little bit sometimes to embrace until they actually start to see how the use case works.
Yep. It's funny, you know, look at the software industry. The software industry, the whole professional services grew up because software was some monolithic something, you know, square box, and you got to jam it into the round hole of a particular customer. Pro services came in and customized. SaaS relieved that a good bit, but it's still, you know, one solution. You kind of use it the way you choose to, but it's still one solution. Now software has evolved where it's all these little microservices, increasingly these little microservices. So if that's a round environment or a triangle environment, it can be used in there without a lot of, you know, kind of force fitting it. So those pro services, those developers now can create products as opposed to having to customize,
Right.
shrink wrap stuff.
Great. Well, I want to wrap up now and thank you both for talking about transformation, talking about where the industry is going. I think you're great examples of seeing where it's going, but also transforming organizations. And especially want to thank you for your contribution to our partners. Now, so everyone knows, they're on very tight schedules. I believe Don has to race off to missed a big meeting today to be here and is racing off to a board meeting. Don, or Alan rather, is in a little trouble because he's supposed to be at wedding rehearsals right now. Congratulations, his daughter is getting married.
On Saturday.
That's right, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I think the sacrifices both of them made to be here signals to us that from the top, these organizations believe in the channel, believe in you, and the importance of spending time with you. So thank you.
Our
Great.
pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.